Hey guys, so Unit 6, Lesson 5, predicting using percent. So we're going to talk about how to make predictions about the future based on how people have done in the past. At the Athens Olympics, the U.S. women's basketball team showed that they were not only great at free throws, but also at 2- and 3-point field goals from all over the court. The team's center, Lisa Leslie, made 57 of the 97 total field goals she attempted in 8 Olympic games. So here we go. We got some details on Lisa Leslie. Cheryl Swoops made 9 out of 21 3-point field goals she attempted at the Olympics. So we've got some data here on Cheryl. All right. What are the shooting averages for Lisa and Cheryl? Write as both a percent and a decimal to the thousandths place. Now, what we want to point out is that shooting averages means how many did you make out of how many you attempted. So for Lisa, she made 57 shots out of 97. And she was talking total field goals. Field goals are the shots that you take while you're playing the game. They can be worth either 2 or 3 points. So if we want hers as a percent, we could set up that X over 100%. So we would cross multiply, right? 97 times X, 57 times 100, which is 5,700, and then divide both sides by 97. We would get X equals, it's approximately, I do have to round, 58.76%. So she made over half. That's great. So first of all, we were asked to find both as a percent. So this would be the percent for Lisa. And then if we took the 58.76 and we wanted it to be a decimal, we could move our decimal point so that it got smaller by 2 places, 0. Now notice it says to the thousandths place, and that's really important. Anytime in sports where we're doing averages as a decimal, 5, 8, the thousandths place would be the 7, but since the 7 is followed by a 6, we would round up to 0.588. So averages in decimal form are always to the thousandth place. All right, now how about Cheryl? Cheryl made 9 out of 21 3-point field goals. So she was an outside shooter. And we want to know what her percent was, X out of 100%. So we would do 21 times X equals 9 times 100. And that 21X, missed my X there, divide both sides by 21. X is approximately 42.857. So I probably rounded out further than I needed to. I could probably go like 42.9 and be fine. But that would be her percent. Forgot to put the other one there. And so for Cheryl, this is actually a really good percent. If we're talking about percents for 3-pointers, that's actually quite high. And then if we want to take 42.857 and move it as a decimal, we would say 0.42. That 8 would be in the thousandths place. It's followed by a 5, so we would round it to 0.429. And that would be her shooting average as a decimal. All right, so both very good percentages. 2-point field goal statistics for 3 players on the U.S. women's basketball team during the 2004 Olympics are shown below. Find the actual percent of field goals made by each player, round the percent to the tenths place. So we're going to write it as a fraction, we're going to write it as a decimal, and we're going to write it as a percent. So the decimal is always going to be to the thousandths, like we said before, and the percent is going to be to the tenths. And you're going to notice quickly why those make sense. So the fraction for Yolanda Griffith would be she made 26 out of 43. Now, in order to get that as either a decimal or percent, I'm going to use my space down here and say 26 out of 43 is X out of 100%. 43 times X equals 26 times 100, and then I would divide both sides by 43. Now this is going to give me her percent. So her percent rounded to the tenths is 60.5%. It's approximately, I did have to round. So up here for percent, I would say 60.5%. Now I'm going to put that little approximately in front of it so everybody that I'm communicating with knows that I rounded. Now, when I want the thousandths, I just have to move that decimal point 2 places. So 60.5, if I go 2 places, here's the best part. When I rounded this one to the tenths, 0.605 is already to the thousandths. So approximately 0.605, I don't have to do any more rounding. I did the rounding once. The percents to the tenths, when I move the decimal point 2 places, gives me a decimal to the thousandths. All right, Don Staley had 12 out of 23. So if we do 12 out of 23 as a percent, so we want to do x over 100. So 23 times x equals 12 times 100, and divide both sides by 23. We're going to get that x is approximately 52.5%. Also, very good. So we would say approximately 52.5%. Now, if we want to turn that into a decimal, we just take our decimal point, move it 2 places to the left, approximately 0.525. Last but not least, Tamika Catchings made 19 out of 47. Now, I will mention all 3 of these are in lowest terms. None of them have like a 2 in common, a 3 in common, anything like that. So I could not put them in lowest terms. They are actually already in lowest terms. That happens a lot with real data. These are real numbers about real women who played in the real 2004 Olympics. So 19 out of 47 equals x out of 100%. So 47 times x equals 19 times 100, or 1900. Divide both sides by 47, and we get x is approximately 40.4%. So if the percent, 40.4%, rounded to the tenths, if we move it 2 places to the left, approximately 0.404. Still a really good average. All right, so remember how earlier we talked about being able to go back and forth between percent and decimal. Percent, you'll notice all of these percents, 60s, 50s, 40s, all of the decimals rounded to the thousands, but they're all less than 1. The percent was less than 100%, so the decimal is less than 1. The decimal number also smaller than the percent number. All right, percents can be used to show the past performance of a basketball player. You can also use those past percents to predict a player's future performance. For example, Sue Bird made about 30% of her 2-point field goals during the Olympics. Estimate the number of 2-point field goals you would predict she might make in her next 50 attempts. We're going to call this an estimate because we're predicting something that hasn't happened yet. So you'll see that the question would say, estimate the number. We're not making an estimate like a best guess. We're using the word estimate because we are making a prediction. All right, so first option is to use a proportion, and it's probably the one that we're most familiar with. So in the past, she's made 30% of her shots. How many do you think she'll make out of her next 50? So how many out of 50 will turn out to be 30%? We would set that up the same as we've been doing, 30 times 50, x times 100, and we would get that x is 15. So we're predicting she can make 15 out of her next 50 attempts. Another way to do it is to use the decimal form of the number. And some people really like this method, and this one is perfectly acceptable as well. 30% as a decimal is 0.30. And in order to use the decimal form, you've got to turn that percent into the decimal 0.30. Because it's of 30% of 50, we would use multiplication. So 0.30 times 50, and you still get the same answer, 15. So we are predicting, we can use a proportion to predict, or we can use multiplication to predict. Swin Cash made about 80% of the free throws she attempted during the Olympics. About how many free throws would you expect her to make in her next 25 attempts? So in the past, she has made 80% of her free throws, which is super, super great. So we are going to say how many out of her next 25. So we are trying to find 80% of 25. So we're going to say how many out of 25. That's really what the first fraction reads. How many out of 25 is 80%? And it's always over 100. Now, if she made all of her shots, we would predict her to make 25 out of 25. But she's only making 80% of her shots. So we're going to do 80 times 25 equals the x times 100. I don't know 80 times 25 off the top of my head, so I would write it out first. 100x equals 2,000. divide both sides by 100, and we're going to say x equals 20. So we predict she will make 20 out of her next 25. We predict 20 out of her next 25 attempts, which, again, really great. She should give lessons to Shaquille O'Neal. Now, what if she had chosen to go with the decimal option, right? What if we wanted to do 80% of 25? First, we need to change 80% to the decimal, 0.8 or 0.80. Of, we would use multiplication, and 25. So you would either write out the 0.80 or you would do it on a calculator, 0.8 times 25, and we would still get the same prediction of 20. We would still predict that she would make 20 out of her next 25. In their first 4 Olympic Games, the U.S. women's basketball team made 13 of 52 three-point field goal attempted. Based on that record, tell how many three-point field goals you would expect the team to make in each number of attempts, like the new hole. So another way to make predictions, notice I didn't give you any percents up here, okay? I could find their percent. I could say 13 out of 52 equals X out of 100, and I could say they made 25% of their shots. That is one option, and then we could go up and use the same method we did for Swin, either the proportion or the decimal with the multiplication. But there's another option as well, and this option is shorter. We can say, sample, how did this team do in the past? So in the past, this team made 13 out of 52, and then the second fraction is how do we think they'll do in the future? So if 60 is the new whole, how many do we think they'll make out of the next 60? Notice there's no percent in that question anywhere. So in the past, they made 13 out of 52. In the future, how many do we think they'll make out of 60? So we would do 52 times x equals 13 times 60. 52x equals, and I've got to do 13 times 60, which is 780. I would divide both sides by 52. And I would say 15. I predict that if they made 13 out of 52 in the past, they are going to make 15 out of their next 60. So we predict 15 out of the next 60 shots. Okay, so that's another option. Instead of getting the percentage, which is 25%, we can skip straight to 2 fractions, no percents at all. So the next whole is 80. So if in the past they made 13 out of 52, X, how many do we predict they'll make out of the next 80? So we've got 1 for the past and 1 for how do we think they'll do in the future. And that's really all this is. So 52x equals 13 times 80. So 52x equals 1,040. Divide both sides by 52. X equals 20. So we think they're going to make 20 shots out of their next 80. Now, just for the sake of argument, 20 out of 80 is the same as 2 out of 8 or 1/4, and that matches up with the 20%, 25%. So 20 out of 80, the same as 1/4, 1/4, the same as 25%. So it all kind of comes back around to working out the same way, regardless of which method you choose. So if 13 out of 52 was how they did in the past, how many out of the next 45? So 52 times x equals 13 times 45. Again, we're just doing cross products. So 52x equals 585. And divide both sides by 52. And we're going to get x equals 11.25. Now, you can't make 11.25 shots. It doesn't work that way. So here we would say we predict 20 out of the next 80 shots. On this one, we would say we predict about 11 of the next 45 shots. And you'd have to put the about in there because we'd have to round it because we can't make a fraction of a shot or a decimal of a shot. Last but not least, what if the new total is 120? So in the past, if we made 13 out of 52, how many do you think we'll make out of the next 120? So 52 times x equals 13 times 120. I would expect this to be the largest number because this is the largest new whole. So divide both sides by 52. 1560 divided by 52, x equals 30. So we're going to predict 30 out of the next 120 shots. We predict 30 out of the next 120 shots. All right, so not too difficult. You've got these notes to look back at, and you've also got some options. There's some different ways to approach these problems, whether you want to go with the percent, or if you want to go with this new method that doesn't use the percent at all, if you want to go with the proportion versus going with the multiplication with the decimal form, lots of options.